be beat, as I am joined by the tireless decoder of biblical mystery, the earnest lover of prophecy, history and mythology, the astute researcher of all ancient faiths and their sacred texts, the fearless illuminator of secret societies, and the skilled author of the Genesis 6 conspiracy, the one and only Gary Wayne graces our presence tonight. Gary, it's my deep honor to have you back again. Thank you for returning to Rogueways.
Well, thank you for inviting me back and rescheduling because of some personal issues that came up in September. So yeah, excited to be back. And I understand we have a chat room and audience that's loaded for bear with questions. So should be an interesting night.
Yes, I'm very excited. And we're wondering, speaking of the chat, if people are seeing Gary right side up or upside down, because I'm seeing him upside down, but we have no idea why. And we don't know how to fix it. And so we're wondering if you guys are seeing it that way and if it is too terrible to manage, or if we should just keep going. So let us know.
and I see Lindsay right side up as well as myself. So I'm not sure.
It's so weird.
We're not sure whether the gremlin is on her end or my end.
Oh, it's my end. Everybody says you're right side up for them. So you're just upside down for me. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
then let's turn the whole world upside down with the answers we're going to give tonight.
Absolutely. I am so excited. Yeah, that's shocking to me. Okay, so before we jump in and get started, I do want to remind everybody that you can subscribe at subscribestar.com/rogue-ways to keep the show going and to keep in touch in case censorship. It's going really badly for a lot of people right now, and if they decide to deplatform me on all these different places, Subscribestar should remain a place where we can keep connected and communicate with each other, and you can still get access to all of this, and we can keep this going. So subscribing to Subscribestar keeps you safe, and it keeps me safe, so go do it. Even at the $1 level, that'll still allow us that connection, and I think that's pretty manageable, $1 a month. So go check that out. And you can also find more content at rogueways.org, as well as you can donate to the Compassion Fund. We have prizes going, so if you donate to the Compassion Fund at paypal.me/Corey Sharman, that's QUORRISCHARMYN, then you can win some prizes, and we can keep our community going in times of need as well. And so that brings us to the pointless question of the episode, Gary. And I was going to ask you, given that everything feels like pure chaos and like we're approaching the end times and and it's all crazy, what are you doing? Like, do you have any simple pleasures you're indulging in to keep things feeling kind of normal and positive, or what are you doing?
Well, I guess my biggest sort of passion in terms of trying to keep sanity is just to try and better understand things and try and communicate more information, more relevant information, more details on people that maybe people haven't thought about in my commentaries and on the shows. And I know a lot of things we're going to cover off I've talked on hundreds of shows, but I always try and bring new information to every show and just sort of add to that bank. So that's kind of what I do, because I get actually a sense of solace and sense of balance if I'm out there trying to have a positive effect. I'm not trying to scare people as opposed to educate people. I understand to a lot of people I might scare them, but it should be a gentle way in terms of plant some seeds. You may not be ready yet, but remember this: when you see more of it or it comes up, maybe it'll ring a bell, and maybe you'll understand a little bit better, and maybe you'll dig into things a little bit more.
Yes, I love that. And I'm so grateful. I love following you on Facebook. And if anybody out there isn't already doing that, they should, because sometimes you post these posts that are incredibly well researched and detail laden and just mind blowing. And I love it. Yep. It's so fun to fall into those little rabbit holes. So.
Well, and if people see those, I mean, those tend to be a lot of the documents that I offer up. The difference between what you see on Facebook and if you ask me for it is that the sourcing footnotes are in the document I'll send you if you want more information on that. And to me, there's a lot of talking heads out there. I tend not to talk about anything unless I'm clearly speculating and saying I'm speculating. I have sources on what I say. And I think that's one of the key things, because I talk about, my book's a conspiracy book, and I don't want to, I don't want to say that there's different sort of grades of conspiratory writers and stuff like that,
There
conspiracists,
are.
but, but my objective is to put accurate information in front of people and then challenge them to look at the veracity. And that's why I put so many footnotes in my book. There's over 100 pages of endnotes in the book.
Let's see, this is the footnotes, just the references, and that's the book. And
Yeah.
there's where I got to. I tried to finish it for today, and I got that. That's how much I have left. So I did pretty good.
I also get told that my bibliography is worth the price of the book, so that they can go out and get more of that, into more of that information and stuff. And a lot of people say, I thought I had a good library, but you got books in there I've never heard of before. So
it's incredible. Yeah, the level of academic quality of your research is amazing, and I really appreciate that, because that is exactly how it is. You get a lot of people talking and not a lot of people. I'm one of them. I'm really bad at remembering where information came from unless I'm writing like an academic paper. And so this is, like you said, it's like priceless. The Genesis 6 Conspiracy is the book. It's seriously, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, we could do a whole episode. You could make like a documentary episode on every single chapter in this. And that's how much it is. And it would be amazing. And I hope that maybe that'll happen someday, because a lot of people like to watch information rather than read it.
Yes.
But it's a dense, thick, and it's amazing, because as long as I've been in, looking into conspiracy, and especially like religious overtones and these types of things, and especially Christianity, as that's sort of my background as well, I have not come across most of the ideas in this book. Like, it's mind-blowing. It's really great.
I'm glad because, I had no idea how original some of the things I was doing in there. I wasn't aware of anything that was anything like my book, but I wasn't 100% sure on that. And I wasn't looking for people. I mean, when I was adding additional information, I was sort of targeting, what information do I want? What type of sourcing do I want on that to make it as credible and as relevant as possible? So I had no idea whether or not people had written about this over and over and over and over and over, but I had never seen anything. And I knew if there was one thing that was kind of original in it, it was maybe to tell the whole story and sort of make sense of it.
The whole story. I mean, you connect literally everything that I have ever thought of in one vast conspiracy, and it's amazing. I love it. I can't recommend it enough. I really hope people grab it and get into it. Like I said, you can just pick one chapter at a time and blow your own mind. It's really cool. But before we get into a bunch of the ideas in the book, I want to just ask you briefly what your thoughts are, if it can be brief, on what's happening with COVID-19 right now and the alleged crisis, and how that relates to your sort of point of view of where we're at with things.
Well, I don't think anybody should be surprised that there would be a winter return and a fall return to an increase, whether it's flu or anything, or cold or anything that would be related to that, especially when there's no vaccine or anything like that. And even with the flu, it mutates and we get another version of it. So we shouldn't be surprised on that. And we shouldn't be surprised that in terms of where we're at is that the people who are the fastest in the world, and typically they tend to be globalists and left-wing globalists, and there is a distinction there, are the ones that are now clamoring for more shutdowns. And we're going to hear, this is not going to be a clamor, it is going to be such a loud noise, and I think they're going to try and force their way to do it again, because it does two things. One, it just reasserts the power, and they've learned lessons from the first go around in terms of how to use that blunt instrument, because they're certainly not interested in doing a surgical approach to it and looking after the most vulnerable. Those are the ones who tend to go by the wayside by the first approach, and just to target and how to, areas of breakouts, and to figure out how to do things safely. And none of that is addressed in any of their approach. So maybe none of it's too much, but for the most part, that's not their priority. The priority is how to abuse power. Mm-hmm. So expect more of that to go on, and expect them to ignore that one of the reasons why we're getting an increased caseload is there's way more testing. But they're ignoring the amount of people who are in the intensity ward, or intensity high care wards, right? I'm not sure I got that word right, but intensive care units, I mean.
There you go.
There I go. I was around it, but not on it. It's like horseshoes.
Yeah.
And the mortality rate continues to fall, which it probably should because of the more cases being,
right.
accounted for and tested for.
Seen have it, and only this many.
Which is going to bring the mortality rate way below the flu, which you have a vaccine for. I'm not saying it's not a bad disease because we've not seen it before and there's no immunity to it. And so it's probably going to be, a fairly difficult winter, but expect them to use junk science, ignore all the information that's inconvenient and all the facts that are inconvenient, because this is a test run for bigger and better things, because this is just the start of pandemics, as the birth pangs are predicted in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and part of the earthquakes and part of the famines and part of the wars and part of the rumors of wars, they have to increase as we start to approach the last 7 years and the opening of the seals. So expect this to be a trial run for the catastrophe of pestilence and other catastrophes to come to exert their power and to do it more efficiently, because they want to recreate the feudal system that they've had throughout history. They just want the noble elite to have all of the power, all of the money, all of the control, all of the good food, all of the education, and they want to only allow the peasants to have as much education as it takes to serve them. And it's about breaking the economics and the wealth of the people and creating it level to create the most, what they'll say, the most equal society the world has ever seen, which currently, from a historical perspective, would be China. Before they started to take on some capitalist ideas, they were the most equal country in the world, but they were the poorest country in the world. That's the model they're trying to set up with. And then the ruling elite had all the food, all the comfort, all the power, all the wealth, and actually they still do. They've just set it up on a national socialism basis with oligopolies working with the communists. So I think that's where we're at. And I think as we go through this next part of COVID, I think we need to keep an eye on and stand up and protest every step of the way and try and hold them accountable. I think we'll lose, but I think we ought to do the right thing and try and educate people about what they're doing, even though they're going to look at you in their brainwashed eyes that are all glazed over. But maybe a few more people will wake up, because this is designed to dumb people down, make them subservient, and then deceive them into destruction.
Yeah, well said and well summarized. And if you can reach anybody and remind them of their humanity and their soul, then you may be like part of the force that helps them save that. And that's worth a lot, even though, like you said, we probably can't stop their overarching plans. They've been at it for thousands of years.
And, I like, some passages out of the New Testament that talks about tribulation, and in the same word as for affliction and tribulation in the signs of the end times. I mean, we're clearly told in the New Testament that all Christians should expect tribulation, and that to reach the kingdom of heaven, expect to have tribulation, because that's when we're going to be tested. That's when your loyalty and your faith is truly tested. It's easy to be a fair weather Christian, but when you're tested, that's when it really counts. And I'm not a fan of having to be tested, believe me. But but I think the New Testament does a very good job of telling us and preparing us if we want to hear about it. And it's unfortunate that there's a lot of messages out there that says Christians don't have to go through tribulation.
Yeah, there's a lot of supposed Christians who don't seem to have a lot of Christian understanding. That it's really confusing to me, but I guess that's just where they're at. And
they can be brainwashed too.
Right.
right? I
Yeah, and
mean,
like,
if you don't critically ask the hard questions,
yeah.
and if you don't do your own research and say, hey, wait a minute, what you're saying is in conflict with what the Bible actually says, then you're easily led astray. And they know that. And it's unfortunate you can't trust all of the leaders, but you test them as the Bereans did with Paul against what he was teaching to what is actually in Scripture.
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. And what are your thoughts then, speaking of all that and how where we're headed, of how this election fits into it? And what are your expectations?
Yeah, isn't it crazy?
It's
So
terrifying.
it is. So you have within the globalist movement, you have different factions, and everybody wants control. And the Western European faction is determined to set up the New World Order, which I like to call the Nephilim World Order.
Yeah, I
Um,
like that.
in a fashion where the United States is going to be weakened significantly and less influence. So we have to understand that that's one of the factions, and that's what has been worked at by so much of the left in Canada and the United States and elsewhere, is to bring the West down completely by economic destruction and internal chaos and everything else. And then there's the other proponent of the globalism that wants a stronger position, whether or not it's in Russia, whether or not it's in China, or whether or not it's in America, whether or not Trump is, the flip side of the same globalist coin. We'll have to wait and see, because he plays many moves deep, unlike what the people who are against him say he does. He's
Yeah.
very intelligent, and he usually wins. We'll see whether he wins this election. So I guess where I'm going with that is although he's been very, very good to Christians, and that enough to be able to push back against what the other side would do is, maybe worth considering. But until we see what his end game is it just, I want the New World Order, I just want a bigger position? I want the New World Order, but I want to ensure my family and offspring have a bigger role ongoing throughout the next generations. Is that what he's fighting for, or is he truly pushing back against globalism? And he's never said he wants to be out of globalism. So everything he does is saying, well, we're still going to trade. We're still going to have treaties. We're still going to support all of these other organizations. I'm going to shape it a little bit differently, but we're still directionally going in the same direction. Just that he's, giving America a better position and role in terms of what that looks like, which is, diametrically pulls apart to what the other side wants, at least in terms of their worldview. And so that's where the conflict is going on. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer. So the outcome is globalism, or directionally still globalism, but is it to our benefit or not? And I'm totally anti-globalist. So, if you have globalist Republicans, the only difference between them and the leftists is a few insignificant policies.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that way. And someone, my boyfriend actually was saying, if Trump gets in, one of the ways that it could be spun is that all these riots that would happen in response to that, because of how just insane everyone is, would be sparked. And then the UN could be called in to help America squash that. And there's our inroad to globalism too. So
Sure.
even if he did mean well, but isn't he also of the lineage of Vlad the Impaler? I thought. I'm not sure, actually, now that I said that.
I've not found evidence on that yet. I've heard that said, but I've not done the research on that.
Okay.
It would, it would not surprise me. I mean, Prince Charles says he's of the bloodline of Vlad the Impaler and has the genealogies to prove it.
Can you imagine bragging about that?
The thing is, the Trump family, it doesn't, anything that I've researched doesn't go back to wealth for a very long period of time. But they did gain access to power and control to a certain degree that isn't really properly explained with his father and grandfather. But it's not that really sort of direct link. But anybody, typically anybody who gets elected, is of the bloodlines, but he is
Yeah.
hated so much that you wonder
Yeah.
whether or not, but he also came from them. I mean, he was a Democrat, so he just decided, and they wouldn't let him run. So he said, no, I'm going to run anyways. I just won't run in the Democratic Party. So it's hard to know. That's why,
Yeah.
and I always take a cautious approach with President Trump. I like most of his policies. I don't like how he talks and I think you can be strong and things like that, but I do like most of his policies.
Yeah.
And I don't care what he says about the media. He can say anything he wants on that, but it's
Yeah.
all of the personal attacks that I think he doesn't need to react to. So, but hey, he talks like a Democrat. So, I mean,
Yeah.
people always give the Democrats a pass on how nasty and evil and horrible they are when they talk about their opponents. They'd
Yeah.
say the most horrible things. He just
They'll
talks
talk about
like,
killing them. And,
yeah,
I was just saying today, they can make fun of Trump for his body size, but if
yeah,
anybody else makes fun of anyone else for their body size, they're body shaming, but they can
yeah,
do it to Trump. And I'm like, you're
yeah.
such hypocrites.
Exactly. They can call him a Nazi. They can call him anything they want. And so he's what I like to tell people, and they always kind of look at me strange. I says he talks like a Democrat. That's why you find it objectionable. They're not
That's
supposed to be
hilarious.
firing back at the establishment in the same way they treat us.
Yes. That's awesome. Well, so I have a totally random question that I don't think is addressed in your book, but I just want to know your opinion on, and if you've heard about it and thought about it, and it's the apotheosis of George Washington. This is a mural that's on the dome of the
Yeah.
roof of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And they're literally saying that George Washington became a god. That's what apotheosis means.
Yep. That's the
weird.
symbol. That's the symbolism. And he's overseeing as a god, America, right? Which is going to be the new Atlantis.
Yeah.
Right. It's really bizarre, but it's more
It's
bizarre
weird.
than that. I mean, that's classic Greek architecture
True.
with the white dome. And of course, that's the helm of Western polytheism. Like it's this, the Roman polytheism is Greek polytheism. So you combine those two and you have this symbol of that polytheism because those were the same dome buildings that they built for their temples. And the classic dome temple is on Mount Hermon, or was on Mount Hermon. It's not quite, fully erected, but it was a white domed temple of the Temple of Pan in Bashan at Mount Hermon. If you can believe that. It's the same structure. So why wouldn't they have an occult temple in a government that's destined to bring about the New World Order? That's what they created it for. It was a model for how to set up the world government that's going to be in place, where you have individual states that have one strong central government with particular I guess I would call it powers and levers. And so that's why the Templars had that set up. That's what their dream was, and they knew about the continent even before it was discovered, but that's how Columbus found it. He got the maps from the Templars who had sailed over there. And that's why I know I'm going on a rant here, but that's why the Santa Maria, bore a Templar flag.
And
Columbus
Saint
was a
Maria.
Freemason. Yeah.
Yeah.
None of that. They always show it to you in plain sight. So I guess, when we look at why America was set up, that was set up heavily by Gnostics and Freemasons to create a constitution, not to protect Christians, but to protect their religion from Christianity, but also created in a design that they could turn it against Christians when they wanted to. So look for the Constitution to be used as hate speech against Christians, because that's why they did it, to protect Gnostics and to persecute Christians in the end time. And what's also interesting about that, and I don't know whether your audience knows, I mean, it's a great document. And it's worked pretty well for Christians until they want to spring the trap on it. But that's the same constitution that all the other constitutions in the world are based on.
It's literally the template for the New World Order.
and the universal religion.
Yeah. So George Washington must have done some amazing things to be lifted up to a godhood in their order, but like you were saying, they always have to claim their origin or show their sort of colors literally on
Yes.
their flags and things. They
Yeah.
someone pointed out that Biden in his campaign, image is like Biden, and then the E doesn't have this side; it just has the 3 lines for the E, and they're red, and the 3 red
Yep.
flags are this slogan that the Chinese Communist Party used
Yeah.
with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And I'm like, this is another example where they just have to show where their
They do.
allegiance is,
And in one of the days in the last week that he actually was out in public, which
one of the
hasn't been very
days.
many days, again, I can't believe there's a nominee that's not capable of working a full day who wants to become president, but we are where we are.
Yeah.
But I digress. They showed
Yeah.
him coming out of a church, and it's St. John's Church. This is the Freemason church that most presidents attend that are Freemasons, and that St. John's Bible is what a lot of the presidents, like the Bushes, were sworn in under. And so he's coming out of a Masonic church that's has the cloak of a Christian church that is absolutely infamous or famous in Masonic history in America. I mean, but nobody ever takes note of that, and had this huge compass thing coming out of the door and everything. It's like, I'm going, did they really show that? They did. But so again, you have this domination of their candidates for presidency, and typically you get 2 of the same to choose from.
Yeah. They're always the same, and if we even choose is also a question, or if it's just predetermined and it's just all a show. But I find it fascinating, just to jump into some of the content of the book, that to think about writing as a form of lying, because I'm an author and I've always felt that way, that words will never actually say the truth. You can work so hard to get the right words in the right order to try and say what you're saying, but when it comes down to it, they're always going to fall short. They're always going to be possibly misleading depending on who's looking at it and what time and what's going on. And you talk about that writing was actually introduced as a form of a way to allow. It seemed like you were saying that it was a way to allow people to lie, because without that it would be much harder to lie. And so am I characterizing it correctly? And if so, what preceded it then? How did we communicate in a more pure way? Was there just sort of direct knowing, or do you have ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean, communication is innocent when it's first created, right? But whether or not it's that technology or that knowledge or that skill, all of that has a capability to be applied for good or for evil, since the knowledge of good and evil came into our world, into the physical world for humans. And so we use for truth, like the Bible. Although I would say that, to underline your point, that English is not a language that easily, I shouldn't say that, it's the translators. What happens when you get translations out of Hebrew and Greek into English is they don't give the full meaning to the words. They choose less words instead of more words to give you the full meaning. So, but again, that would be part of that communication strategy. Cloak it, don't give you the true meaning, because the closer you get to the truth, the more you're going to understand. So when we look at the 7 sacred sciences then that are going to be developed from the knowledge, according to the Masons, this is their story, and it has a lot of plausibility in my books, because the original knowledge that the 7 sciences are based on is the knowledge that Adam, as they say, was taught in Eden. So we know Adam would be taught a lot of things by God. In fact, he's the first agrarian. And to be an agrarian, whether or not you're raising crops or orchards and or raising cattle, you need to know a lot of things, including astronomy. And, and we look at farming today, and it's, maybe everybody doesn't understand, but they have to know a lot of things to be able to farm. Yeah. And so that was also needed even in the past. And so it's all of this knowledge that Adam learns that gets passed on to Cain and Abel, and then to Seth after Abel is killed. But Cain takes it in a way to lead people away from God, to not give God credit for anything, to degrade God, and to honor the pantheon of gods that he's going to follow, including building things. So Enoch, his first son, according to Masonic history, takes this knowledge passed on to him from Cain, learned from Adam, learned in Eden, and says, there's a lot of knowledge here, and we're going to put it into 7 sacred sciences, which we know today as the 7 liberal sciences. And those 4 things that I just said, what Cain did, is exactly what this knowledge has been designed to do ever since. So that's why in universities, you can't have anything about communism or God. Everything is designed to lead people away from God. You know, the buildings are designed to honor the gods in that same Greek sort of architecture structure, and they get degrees just like in mysticism and secret societies and the whole bit. I won't go through the whole diatribe, but you get sort of the flavor that I'm talking about. And bringing that back to the same liberal arts, the first 3 are grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics. Okay, so grammar, it's in the old understanding, is the molding of minds through reading and learning to write and to speak properly. So it's an art of being eloquent and learning more and things like that through writing. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion. So when you hear these terms that they're using out there, like straw man and things like that, those are all the tactics they teach in universities on how to not nicely take argument or to discredit somebody. It's part of the whole rhetoric, and it's the dark side of persuasion.
Yeah.
And then you have dialectics, which is discerning through the falsehoods and identifying the falsehoods and looking for weaknesses and things like that. Now, it's 3 that make up whole philosophy that goes to writing, right? And philosophy is formed from these first 3 as they take their history. And philosophy now becomes theology because it comes from, you know, basically 2 words, one from Sophia, right? Yeah. And the other one, which and I can't remember what Philo goes back to. I'd have to double check on that, but they're made up. It's a word made up to describe what they're doing. So it's wisdom and it's theology coming together. And philosophy is believed in mysticism and in the secret societies and those who are running the universities, and that higher and superior to all of the individual 7 sciences, because it's the theology. It is the one that arbitrates between all of the other sciences. It's the one that gives its theology and direction. So that's why they want to teach philosophy in university as opposed to Christian theology, because it comes from polytheism. It's not secular like people think. And philosophy also leads you to harmonizing the power of the universe through these 7 sciences, and to the absolute supreme ideal that they like to say. And they want to develop humanity into godhood through the sciences. It's not humanity, but they're just determined offspring that they want to have, and to achieve the perfect ethical polytheist spirit. And it is so powerful that the knowledge that the philosophy guides contains that it can destroy the entire world if they chose to do so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like a dangerous game they're playing there.
So they use the language as a terrorist weapon to their advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's there's a theme here, right? Like everything that they have learned and passed down has been to that same sort of end, and not to the end of uplifting humanity and, you know, honoring the way things were designed and set up. None of that is a part of it. It's all about destruction and power. And it's really, really sick to see this thread all throughout history, and you've traced it out like so clearly in the book. And I was surprised and happy to find the answer to what is green language, because green language is one of these things that people drop here and there, and it sounds so intriguing, and you're like, what is green language? And you explain what it is so well. And I don't know if you want to explain to people what your idea about what green language is.
I will. And there's some other terms that go along with it. I just wanted to say, though, as we talk about knowledge and stuff, I'm not against knowledge.
Yeah.
God is not against knowledge. I'm against when it's used for evil.
Yes.
Right. And that's what comes with it. So knowledge isn't evil. It's how it's used.
And part of that is the using it for deception and Yeah.
So when you understand what the green language is, you understand why it works so perfectly with the green movement.
Ooh, good. Yeah. I like that connection.
So green language is legomenon, as it comes out of the occult as well. Yeah, or in legomonism. And it's akin to a fairy tale as an allegory. So all of these are connected. They're all occult terms, by the way, all part of their language. And the easiest way to explain it through a fairy tale, and I'll bring it back. So a fairy tale has this superficial narrative that's really, really interesting and written in a way that is entertaining. But the true meaning isn't in the superficial story. The true meaning is understood by the adepts of mysticism with the different words and allegories and characters and everything that's in there. And that holds within it their complete belief system, their history, and their genealogies in their literature.
That's crazy.
And so, and that's what they also will define the Bible as when the universal religion comes along, that it's a fairy tale. That's why Tolkien and Lewis describe it as a fairy tale. That you need to be an adept mystic to understand the true message of the Bible, which isn't in the superficial narrative. It's in the meanings that they're going to apply to it through the interpretive process, because they do everything in symbols and allegories, where the original church was literalist, both Judaism and Christianity. So it's the wedge between literalism and the interpretive approach. Now, if we move that back to the Legomen language or the green language, and they're synonymous terms, is that it is embedded codes, symbols, allegories that's written out the narrative or the document or in the words that only the adepts will understand, right? So when you hear the Bushes talking in terms of the New World Order, you get that, but you don't get necessarily 1,000 points of light. That would be part of the green language, and 1,000 points of light that they're referring to is the spark of the divine that they would define as the spark of the fallen angels in the offspring of the Nephilim and the Rephaim, want to bring together the New World Order and the universal religion. So when they bring that back, they can have a harmonic convergence to evolve into gods, is the doctrine that they're trying to bring about. And so they encode everything, whether or not it's buildings, or it's in movies, or it's in literature, whether or not it's Shakespeare, fairy tales, science fiction, Dracula, everything for the most part that's written by the so-called elite and the educated elite taught to do so is fit the green language. And so everything then, if you look at the green language and the green movement, isn't the superficial environment.
Yeah.
Right? It is about globalism, taking away rights, and one belief system, and the fastest regime that they're going to do it. And they're using the green movement because it transcends borders and can work all around. And then they give you these apocalyptic predictions all the time to cattle herd you into the open arms of the globalists, who are the monsters.
Yeah. Wow. And it's so effective too, because so many people, even once they start seeing like, wow, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and all these stories I've always been told, they all have this like hidden meaning and wisdom, and like now I'm getting it, so now I'm special. And so you get this like
Yes.
you're playing to people's egos, like, yeah, you can be special too. And
Yep.
the idea that
For-
like,
you're-
oh, we're going to become gods, like that's playing to people's egos, and they're like, I could become a god if I learn these things. And it's like you said,
Yes.
like they're not talking about you.
No, they're not.
You're
You're
just a
not part of
slave
it.
to them. Yeah.
Like the Guidestones, Georgia Guidestones say they only want 500 million. It's only for that spark of the divine that they're talking about, right? That's
Right.
a lot smaller population, and only enough humans to serve them and possibly be used for sacrifice, which you would think would bring back if they got total control.
Yeah.
So I know some people might say, no, he's just sort of adding to the allegory for, green as in nature and stuff like that. Well, of course, nature mysticism is part of polytheism. It's a significant part. But the other tactic that they love to use is double entendres.
Yes.
They love to use words that have double meanings. They go out of their way to select them. So another classic one, just as an example, and pretty much in everything, and also Pope Francis loved double entendres. So watch out for that. But he's a Jesuit, so
yeah, what do you expect?
he would be taught in that. Yeah, you would expect that. Yeah. So and an adept, a Jesuit. So you would expect that. So Sion is in the Priory of Sion. Sion means a small temple, right? And so Sion is also the French word for Zion. That comes out of Italian, and then also originally out of Hebrew. But there's also two Zion words that are used in the Bible. One is, the Zion that's for Jerusalem and for the mountain of Jerusalem, and the city of David. The other one comes in Deuteronomy, and it's Mount Sion, Sion, which is the French spelling of Zion, and it goes back to a word that sounds very, very similar, but that's Mount Hermon. And when they talk about the Priory of Sion, and which is, and again, I have documentation for people that I can send for the veracity of the history of it being legitimate if people want that. It's the founding inner core of the Knights Templar, right? It's where de Bouillon and de Payon and St. Clair and others were all part of that inner Priory of Sion of adepts, and the Templar is the outer order led by adepts, right? So you have to be adept to be a Grand Master, which is the same term for secret society. Why would anybody be surprised at that? And they're all Gnostics. So the Priory of Sion is that classic entendre where you have this temple, which is a small priory where the King of Jerusalem was crowned in 1118 as the first official King of Jerusalem, although Baldwin I was before him and de Bouillon was before that. But he was crowned in a small priory on the Rock of Zion in Jerusalem. And they call that the Priory of Sion. And that's that white dome temple ideology that comes from Mount Hermon that we talked about. And that they're using a double entendre with that word Sion in terms of they can use now both between Zion and Sion, and only the adepts really know when the application is for Mount Hermon and all associated things. The other entendre that's used there is Scion, which is the firstborn being grafted into another bloodline, which has the same sort of etymological links back. And it's always, I mean, you can graft plants, but it's also to graft bloodlines, which they like to scion their bloodlines, right?
Wow.
Ennoble their bloodlines. They do that all the time in plain sight.
Yeah, it's crazy, like how just convoluted and how specific and how nuanced their traps go. It's really amazing.
So, and the reason why they don't want you to know about the Priory of Sion, because it was a secret order, right? But it's just their upper royal Mason orders. But they don't want you to kick into the King of Jerusalem title. that they crowned themselves with in 1118 that has passed down through the Lorraine region where the de Bouillon and Anjou and the de Péan were from, and then the Lorraine Habsburg dynasty, and then over to the Bourbon dynasty, who King Philippe of Spain title, as did Juan Carlos, because they inherit lines and scioning from the Lorraine Habsburg dynasty. Joshua gave Jerusalem to the Benjamites at the time of the conquering of the covenant land. They have scion in their genealogies, and I talked about this in depth in my book. King Saul's line into their scion bloodlines, and he was a Benjamite. And so Antichrist will want to claim the King of Jerusalem title at the abomination at the midpoint of the last 7 years when he becomes ruler of the world.
Because they've, like you said, brought all of these bloodlines into sort of one, that was one of the things why as I was reading, I was like, wait, so are they saying they're Jesus's bloodline? Or are they saying that they're like this other bloodline and saying they're this? And then I finally was like, oh, they're saying they're all of them. They've brought them all into their group here.
Yeah, they have. And it's really important not to have Jesus's bloodline. And to me, that's alleged. Whether or not the other ones are real or not, they believe it or not. That's what's really important. And what they do with what they believe is what you need to focus on. Right. So it doesn't matter whether or not we believe it. It's what they believe, what they're doing. That's the thing to keep your eye on. But they needed a way to plant seeds of destruction to de-deify Jesus in the end time, because that's the only way Christians are going to give up their Christianity belief system. And Paul said, if Jesus wasn't resurrected, then everything is built on a lie, and what we believe in isn't worth anything, right? So they need to do that in preparation for the universal religion, which is why it's so important you have a Jesuit in charge of the Catholic Church today, who's doing all sorts of doctrinal things, and did another one this week that sort of turned a number of eyes, but we'll see where he goes with this. But they need to do that, and they say they have evidence that Jesus married Mary Magdalene. So the Da Vinci Code is just preparation, brainwashing. Even they say, oh, it's just a fiction based on their belief system, and it has tons of real important information in there if you know enough to weed between the misinformation and what's important to them, what they've embedded in there. So it's like that fairy tale story again, right? Yeah. Right. So you need to understand how they write, and so they're going to present those genealogies as part of Antichrist's pedigree, so they say, which also deifies Jesus because he wouldn't have died on the cross.
Yeah, and that story is it's like, I just remember learning, reading, I didn't read it. I think I just watched it. Anyway, learning about the Da Vinci Code and thinking like, oh, that's what's been going on this whole time. It's all just a misunderstanding. And it's like the same thing I was saying earlier, where it sort of almost plays to your ego, where it's like, see, you're figuring things out. You're special. And really then you see later that it's actually, that is all part of the trap as well, and it's really fascinating.
And everybody then says, okay, well, it's basically saying the Da Vinci Code is something that should terrify us because Da Vinci painted the Last Supper painting, which he was a Gnostic and everything, and so you have a Gnostic painting in allegories and symbolism into his work that sets forward polytheist belief systems. That somehow should make us question our faith. Only let them brainwash us, right? So they put in the V in there, which is the male between Jesus and anyways, the V between Jesus and the person sitting to him on the left, as I recall, right? And that's the symbolism for the female goddess, right? And fertility goddess. And then they have, I think it's supposed to be John in the picture that looks like a female, which is supposed to be Mary Magdalene. And then they got these pictures in the background that are really sort of reminiscent of Mount Hermon and three portals and their typical triptych architecture, and it's just absolutely loaded with a symbolism that is been bought into Christians as almost a sacred painting by polytheists.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because there's a lot of people, and I was going to get into this later.
And no grail on the table.
Oh, I did not notice that. I don't remember that. That's interesting. So that's the only grail, is the V-shaped goddess thing. Yeah. Which, and the whole grail idea then is that the blood itself, that they supposedly had this offspring and that carried their blood forth, and the blood is the Holy Grail.
Yeah, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail bloodline. And that grafts into, as Joseph of Arimathea takes Joseph's third son to Glastonbury, where of course all of the Grail tales and stuff start to come out of, into the Pendragon kingships and the Elven bloodline. So you have a forming of between a pure blood Elven bloodlines that Josephus is going to marry into, and the patriarchal bloodline that they say is a dragon bloodline, and it starts the Camelot dynasties. Understanding Camelot is Camulot, Lot for Sodom and Gomorrah, because that was a shining knowledge in the Gnostic belief system, and Cam is shining. So again, that's why all of the Grail tales are, again, classic Gnostic fairy tale literature, loaded with their genealogies, their history, and their belief system.
It's literally everything has to do with this. And it's interesting too, because I'm like, so they're saying that their Nephilim bloodline and Jesus's bloodline mixed together, and that's supposed to be something that we really like.
That's the ennobled scion they're going to have and present this history in the end time. But they have to discredit everything in the Bible, right? And that's all going to be done. There's certain parts that they'll keep that work to their advantage, but that's exactly what they're going to, what at least the bloodlines in the West are trying to do. Understand there's many antichrists that Jesus says are going to come, and it's going to be hard to decipher. There are bloodlines all around the world. I didn't write about the Chinese bloodlines like the Li family. That come from the dragon creators, and Xi Pin is part of that bloodline, just as Li was before him, part of that bloodline. They have bloodline control in China, and I have a document on that for people if they want it. Also got Putin, who again, his grandfather's name shows up as Putin, and before that there's no name. But what happens in Russia is you have the royal bloodlines, when they have extramarital, and there's a child that's produced, it's their tradition not to give them a name that's quite close. And so Putin's grandfather comes out of the Ukraine, which is why he has so much interest in the Ukraine, is the home of the original czars and the bloodlines of the Putyanin, which is who Putin is a extramarital child. Grandfather was an extramarital child of. So he has bloodlines back, not as pure as what they would like. So he'd be one of the strong men that are going to be part of the 10-king empire. And so there are bloodlines all over the world. You've got the bloodlines in India, like the Khan and Singh bloodlines that all to their gods and offspring. You've got everybody thinks that all of the bloodlines in Central and South America were wiped out. That's not true. Only the king of that time was wiped out, and by 1525 Spain and Portugal had repatriated all of the original rights to the royal families, who continue to this day. So you've got, for example, that are part of the Inca royal bloodline. And you've got several different ones. And all of these bloodlines intermarried with the bloodlines of the Portuguese, the royal bloodlines, and the royal families of Spain. So they were actually scions. These bloodlines are still all out. There will be competing bloodlines all around the world, but as in the Highlander movie, there can only be one. which is another allegory, and it's the
Yeah.
fairy allegory. So they don't drink blood. Quickening, and of course, the quickening shows up in First Peter as a embedded marker by the King James translators. But that's another rabbit hole. But I wanted to something I forgot to say before, and I get asked a lot when I talk about the different literature and things like that. Is they say, how could they get that much control to do it? Well, come on, let's take a step back and think about this. Only in the last couple hundred years has there been a middle class even be able to come out of the peasant feudal system. So they had control with their greater families, because the whole nobility and elite, right from the time of flood, and then before the flood, they took control as well, particularly with the Nephilim coming along in the sixth generation. They've had control of all the education, all the wealth, all the culture.
Yes. Yeah, they
That's
literally control what gets published. Yeah.
Yeah. They've had control all the way through. So why wouldn't it be there? We're just waking up now, and that's what we need to suppress as to who they are, how they communicate, how they have so much control, and now they need to push back the feudal system that was in place up to a couple years ago.
Yeah, they definitely have controlled things. It's for a really, really long time. Like when I say to people for thousands of years, that's not an understatement. It's been thousands of years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump and I'm going to ask you randomly what the deal is with Melchizedek and the Great White Brotherhood. Because you hear...
Did you get on that?
Well, no, I just always, I guess, I don't understand who Melchizedek even is. And a lot of people have this like great love for this person or being. And when I go look into it, there's like 12 different stories. And I'm like, okay, so what's actually going on?
Yes, like everything that the spirit forces do. And with us talking about bloodlines and things like that, look up the word spurious, and then you'll know why I've used it over and over and over in the book. Yeah. So, but I digress again. So Melchizedek. So like everything that's in the Bible or what God has created, right from the beginning, Satan, leader of the rebellion, wanted to counterfeit everything that God had. He wanted to have a throne in heaven like God. He wanted to be as powerful as God. He wanted to have his own world like God. He has kept the same organizational structure of angels as God has. He's creating a counterfeit, which is why Antichrist is like a counterfeit Messiah, right? Yeah. Everything they do is a counterfeit. They'll have a counterfeit army. Everything is designed to be a counterfeit and duplicated as a counterfeit. So one should not be surprised that they would have a Melchizedek order.
Yeah. But
this is the Canaanite order, not the order out of the Bible. And they'll conflate Melchizedek, who comes out of a Jebusite Canaanite city, and I'll come back to this in a second, who gives the blessing to Abraham, and Abraham gives this supposed Jebusite a tenth of everything that he has, who's a Canaanite. And this is the order that Melchizedek is named after. And so you can see how they can create that counterfeit rather easily if you don't understand that. To understand that the Canaanite Melchizedek order is from the pantheon of gods, which begins with El as the god, who's the father of Baal, who's the father of Moloch, who was probably a demigod, Nephilim, the last one. And so this is the Canaanite Mount Hermon pantheon that we're talking about that is duplicating the Melchizedek order, sort of posthumously, if I could put it that, because it would be kind of accurate, but it'll make sense as I explain it, and added in belief system, all in preparedness for the Antichrist to accept that title, because that's what Jesus will be head of that Melchizedek orders, but two separate orders, right? So everything has to be counterfeited. Now, if you go to the symbol of nation, you do not get a genealogy that produces Melchizedek out of nowhere. But then you can say, okay, that's just, he came out of some line, out of the Canaanites, and that's why we don't have it. Fair enough. But that's not the whole story. Right? Fast forward to the New Testament, to the book of Hebrews. It's talking about this Melchizedek order. And it says that there's no genealogy for Melchizedek. It says that he has no mother or father.
Uh-oh.
But yet he's the king of Jerusalem. So it's this person comes out of nowhere, literally. Who Melchizedek is and who will take that order and who blessed Abraham is the person that will take it over. This is the word manifested before he manifested in flesh to become Jesus. He's the one who comes out of Jerusalem as the king, as the true king of Jerusalem, as he's called, and blesses the one who is going to create Israel to produce the 12 tribes, which includes Judah, which will be the tribe that Jesus comes out of.
Huh.
I have a document on that if people want it. It's part of who Satan is, lost in that, but I have one because it's part of the Satan document, because if you look at Satan, as he's described as a cherubim, even though he's also seraphim, and he's also archangel, and again, my series will cover all of that. He's the greatest being that was ever created next, into the physical world and the spiritual world after the three, the Word, the Spirit, and God. So he was as great as it underneath that. And he also had 9 jewels, precious jewels, in Ezekiel 28. That's really kind of interesting because the only time we get any other correlation is with the Levite priesthood, who have 12 jewels, signifying that to be even a more powerful priesthood, and Israel's the nation of priests, but the Levites are the priests of the Israel nation. And it's also used for a communication device with God in the Holy of Holies in the temple. Huh. And so if we understand that that is signifying a ministry, and we also recognize that Satan was seraphim, a fiery serpent angel, as well as cherubim, as well as archangel, and that we understand that seraphim in Isaiah 6 perform ministry before the altar and in the altar of the fiery stones before God, and actually take out one of the stones in Isaiah 6 to purify the sins from Isaiah. We understand that they control government and the religious aspect, even in the spirit side, which is a counterfeit organizational structure just like God has. Then that is suggesting that Satan was a seraphim minister and the high priest before God before he rebelled. Now all makes sense as why Jesus will succeed that and resolve that ancient part of the rebellion as leading the Melchizedek order starting at the start of the millennium. So everything sort of works, and that's why you get that mystery. But you see how the other side will get themselves inside Christianity and counterfeit it into polytheism to lead people away from God.
Yeah. That's great. It's so confusing.
I know that was a long answer, but I thought it was a very good question, and it takes a little bit of time to unpack it.
Well, and it's really good to try to understand it, because this is, like you said, it happened over and over and over and over again. I remember the first time we talked, it blew my mind that there was 2 Enochs. Like, I didn't even know that. Yeah. And now that I've read most of your book, I'm like, oh, literally everything. There's, like you're saying, a counterfeit version of it. It's specifically to be really confusing. And then
that will make where the Essenes fit in, right? Because they're of that Melchizedek order as well. And they use those same terms in their religion, and they're polytheists, and they believe that they have the religion of Heliopolis that Moses was educated in and actually brought back, and then it went rogue into monotheism. So that'll be also how they try and take things back to create this universal religion, because they believe this Gnosticism that, is transplanted to Babel and to Egypt after the flood, and Egypt after the Babel incident. In Nimrod stays in which is Sumeria, to develop the wise men and the magi, and Egypt becomes that second pillar of that religion. And between the two of them, they create this religion that's around the world. Same pantheon, just different vernacular names. And what they're trying to do is recreate and bring everything back to the original Enochian mysticism, whom the Essenes honor, but it's Enoch, son of Cain, just as they also worship fallen angels. Again, all that I document in my book, and I have document on that if you want specifically on the Essene, how their doctrines and things, and what church history has wrote about them, and other historians. I've got that all in a document for people if they want that, like in like a 7 or 8 page document.
That's awesome. It's perfect. And yes, these who they're worshiping, these fallen angels, are the same as the Nephilim, and they're the same as these giants, and they're the same as these titans, and they're the same as these heroes of old, and all of those things. They're all the same group of beings. And I don't know how I was going to transition that into this question, but I wanted to ask about, because this also blew my mind, that Azazel, who is like, very dark, evil entity, was hung on Orion. And that like messed with my head, because ever since I was a kid, and I think a lot of people are like this, I've loved Orion. I'm like, that's my favorite constellation. Yep. There's Orion. Yeah. I always think about Orion, and then the pyramids aligned with Orion. And I was like, wow, Orion's so special. And now I'm like, wait, what's wrong with Orion then? Like, why Orion, and what is this?
And that hung in Orion that I use is what the cult believes, what the polytheist religions believe, as opposed to what monotheism and or the Book of Enoch will say is Azazel hung in the abyss. Okay.
So that's what I was wondering, is the abyss space? Are stars?
No.
Okay.
No, but that's what they believe, and I've got some sources for people in terms of how they come up with that. But it's important to understand that
is heaven and the earth, and hell is in space, and I was like, I'm so confused.
Well, I think the abyss is in the earth, and it's in a different dimension.
Yeah.
So I had to wrestle. Okay, what's going on here? But for some reason, there's a strong occult belief that he's actually hung upside down in Orion.
Which makes sense if you honor this being, and you think, because we think of it that way, like they were put in the stars, like made into a constellation to honor them, and so that kind of makes sense.
And again, that's the allegory part, right? And part of the story, right? And you have to be able to pick up. It's the fairy tale part. And Orion is the great hunter, the great warrior, hunter-warrior, just as Nimrod was both, right? They're always sort of one and the same. It's also thought to be an antichrist figure of the antediluvian Nephilim named Orion, and along their belief system. And that Orion is, the shape of the pyramids, and actually lines up with that alignment in about 10,500 BC as some of that research sort of goes. So we have to understand that that's part of the allegory, and that gods, when they died, somehow gods died, but those would be demigods as opposed to immortal beings. They would be transcended into Orion and other star systems as stars, just as angels are stars, right? So again, it's part of their mystical religion. What we do know is he's hung upside down in their belief, which would now start to stack up with what's in the abyss. And the reason why it's important to understand Azazel as the warrior is he's also the one that is the one who taught how to make weapons in the antediluvian world. He taught the technology of making that. He taught the art of making war and everything to go with it. He was the one who brought war and introduced it to the antediluvian world. He is the destroyer of the antediluvian world. He's the scapegoat, Azazel, as Leviticus 16 is. You've got a translation that's the King James Version. It doesn't say Azazel, it says scapegoat. But you take that back to and it says Azazel. Scapegoat.
Scapegoat.
And the second goat that's sacrificed on the Day of Atonement. And there's no reason for it, but I think it's for the sins of the antediluvian world.
Hmm.
And what's really important about that is I think he's actually Azazel. I'm not Azazel, actually Abaddon and Apollyon, the abyss, who comes out
Yeah.
when that's opened in the last 7 years. And Abaddon and Apollyon goes back to the word, both in Greek and in Hebrew, to mean destroyer. So he's the destroyer of the world, the scapegoat that the sins were hung on him, and where that whole sort of understanding, and a degraded goat god for the rebellion, just as the other goat gods that are satyrs, whether or not they're Pan or Bacchus or Cernunnos and all the different ones. They may be the same god, or they may be part of other fallen angels that were degraded as well, just as Hel, which is the Hebrew word that's in Isaiah 14:12 that the James Version used Lucifer for, but notice the EL on the end. I think that's Satan's original name, one of his names before he was degraded to Satan's status. And so you get this understanding that these satyrs are some god, not a demigod, but a god, as it comes up, let's say in Isaiah 34 or Isaiah 13 in end time prophecy. Really kind of bizarre, but one is about the midpoint of the last 7 years, which is Isaiah 13, and Isaiah 34 in the at the time of the day of the Lord, or Armageddon. And that's also where Lilith sort of shows up, and you got dragons, and you got all of these other things together. And again, that's another rabbit hole, but it's not there for coincidence. So it's part of that whole understanding. So you may not be too surprised to know that tradition in Greek goes back to the same group of words and comes out of the word Apollyon for Apollyon in the abyss. So Apollumus, as I recall, is perdition. And so he's called the son of perdition, the Antichrist. So somehow he's connected to the destroyer as the son of perdition, and probably Azazel. And he also will honor a god of forces in the end time, which is the Hebrew word Maus, which goes back to the Hebrew word Azad, and Ezad is goat, Azad is fortresses, and Azad, which comes out of Azaz, has the same sort of meaning and is also used. You put the EL on there, and you get an angelic name, Azazel, who is the god of forces and the god of war, who comes out of the abyss and is the god that Antichrist honors as Antichrist is coming to power. Now, I also understand he's going to have the power of the dragon or Satan in him as well. So he's going to have lots of help. But understand, all of this is kind of connected.
Yeah. And it's, again, got that counterfeit thing going on. Like you had mentioned, Azazel is hung like Christ on a cross, but upside down. Of course, it's inverted. Yep. And then somehow that was connected with a fake Trinity too. And I'm like, why is the Trinity? They have to mirror the Trinity too, right?
They do. And again, you see it in some of the lower god stories, but there's always sort of an allegory for the higher god. So typically you would know that from what people would understand as Osiris, Isis, the sun Horus, right? And that's all part of the sort of lower ritual and allegory understanding. And of course, Cyrus is an allegory for Satan. And then whoever he would have chose as his fallen angel as a counterpart, or as the Greeks would also name it as Sophia for wisdom, would be that counterpart fallen angel. And then their offspring would be an Antichrist type figure.
Yeah. Oh, you just connect it so well. It's awesome for me. If everybody else hasn't read the book yet, but I read the book and I'm like, have it all floating around, and then talking to you, I get to connect it all, and it's really great. But I wanted to share with you this random point that I was doing this episode on 33, on the 33rd parallel. And one of the things that's on the 33rd parallel is Mount Hermon. It's on the 33rd parallel meeting the 33rd. It's longitude and latitude 3333.33. Did you know that?
I'm not convinced it's the longitude. I think the longitude's more like 35.
Oh, okay.
I've seen pictures
So
where
it's
it shows
slightly
it as
off.
33, but every time I sort of Google it, it says 35 and change.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the exact latitude of Mount Hermon is 33.416.
It's pretty close.
And now what's really interesting is that the UN has its largest manned mission and operation on Mount Hermon. And that's at 33.243 degrees. And it's this sort of separation zone as the Israelis and the Syrians type of thing, which doesn't really make sense. And they control this sort of long strip. It's like, I don't know, it could be, 10 kilometers wide and 14 kilometers deep or something like that. But what it does do is basic straddle, that whole 30-degree aspect, and you wonder, what are they doing there? And it goes back to that Temple of Sion and everything. Mount Hermon is going to come back as a very important part of the universal religion in the end time, I think. And they're looking for stuff. And of course, that's where the Temple of Man is. That's where the Temple of Baal is. And it's all and very, very important to their belief system before and after the flood.
And this, for people who don't know, the Mount Hermon is where the fallen angels came down and basically raped women and made the Nephilim, and started that whole everything, basically. Right? That's where they think they did, at least.
Yep.
So yeah, the UN is just pretending they have a reason to be there.
And there's also one of the, right in that series of temples and things, is the Rock of Gods, and a cave there that is, the gateway to Hades in the belief system. And so one wonders whether or not in the system that's where the fallen angels in the abyss are going to come out of, because the abyss is in Hades in a different dimension, I think. But and so that might be an access to it. And right beside it, and on sort of the slopes in the Golan Heights, or Golanitis, as some people, the Greeks had called it, Gilgal Raphaim, the wheel of the giants, the wheel of the ghosts. And within that spirally sort of Atlantis type of old megalith, you have hundreds of dolmens, and Dome's portal.
Oh, I didn't know Dolmen meant portal.
Yes.
Those are the standing stones, right?
Yeah, like many, what's the name of the structures in England? Those Stonehenge, many Stonehenge megaliths, right? And they're also called fairy dolmens as well, mounds, portals, for the fairies to come through around the world. So if you Google fairy dolmen or just dolmen, you're going to get these pictures that come up, and for the units you can see them. But what's interesting about Gilgal Raphaim is that you have the Ugaritic texts coming out of there, and you have in the Ugaritic texts, the religion of Baal and the creation of the Raphaim, and where the word Hermon comes from, rooted in HRM, ancient Semitic, and that they talk about these Raphaim kings, the Rapiu and the Rapam, as they're called, translated into English, but the root for Raphaim, they were the travelers through these portals into the underworld, or Hades, which where the abyss is also located. And what's also interesting about that is you have a very similar term that shows up in Ezekiel 39 called the passengers, which goes back to the bar, which means to cross over. And so you have these passengers to have a slaughter of the fatlings of Bashan that is going to happen in the northern, just north of Jerusalem, probably on the Golan Heights and in that area. And you have these passengers, and other applications, used for a bar in the Old Testament will be, again, dealing with death and crossing over. So again, you wonder at what they're trying to do there in terms of what they're looking for, and how that will have an implication for weapons in the not too distant future. It's to me, it's to wrap in that old religion again, to bring that into the New World Order.
And they want to be standing there to stand at attention when whatever comes through, basically. I'm kind of surprised they don't have like a particle collider right under there. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Who knows? But I mean, a lot of people think, they built urn on Saint Apollyon, which is, Apollyon. And that's where you would enter in. But again, it's in another dimension. But if you understand occultism, and the reason why it's not necessarily in conflict, and you have these places where you can enter into the underworld all over the world, and in all cultures and all locations. So there seems to be sort of like these portals or things that you can go, and it all goes to the same destination that's located all around the world, just like dolmens all around the world.
Yeah, interesting. It's like their fast travel network. So jumping again, the Nephilim, were seemingly obsessed with drinking blood and torturing and killing and all of this horrible stuff, which is always like makes me, I just always am shocked sometimes. I'm like, who is worshiping these people? Like, by no account were they good. They're awful. So, but whatever you need to do, I guess. But well,
that's why I write in my book is that this religion was imposed on people and enforced by the Nephilim.
But now people are choosing to, like now people have a choice. I mean, there's people I think that are drinking blood and torturing people, and they don't have to do that. No,
but they want to be part of the ruling class.
Yeah, they want to like get their place in they think that they know what's going to happen, and they think their side's going to win, and they want to have their place in that. And I can't imagine it, but I guess that's their road. But now we have these things that are like legal, safe and torture-free, basically where people can consume other people's blood. They have those places where you can go and pay to get a young person's blood transfused into you. And do you feel like this is a similar sort of like they're trying to degrade us by making us think that this is okay and take part in it? Or do you think it's related at all?
Well, I think it's related. They tend to want to have control of everything that's important to them. So it's very important for them to have a blood supply for whatever reasons, right? Whether or not it's for rituals, not to say that they were sacrifices. I mean, I don't know. I'm not on the inside, but people who have been on the inside and somehow are still alive say there are sacrifices. So, but for the ease of the blood stuff, it would be nice to have this blood bank, and it'd be nice to have a better way of tracking the bloodline. So unique, right? And so it's interesting how their organizations control the blood supply, and just like they want to bank information on genes and DNA, they want to track that gene of ISIS I talk about in the book.
Because I haven't gotten to that part yet.
It'll connect a lot of dots, because Rh negative blood, which people think is the bloodline that's inserted into the human bloodline, which was thought to be only positive before, but would go back to the Nephilim, who got it from the fallen angels when they took a physical form.
Yeah.
The trouble is Rh negative is missing antigen. So the argument against it, or the propaganda against it, is that, well, you can't add anything if it's missing something.
Yeah.
Right. So you get down to a choice. Well, maybe it's the positive that is, but I don't think so. It's just a little bit of take a step back on the understanding is it's not the bloodline that's passed on. It's a manifestation of what's passed on. It's the gene that's passed on that produces the Rh negative blood, which is why Rh negative is hot to positive blood. So it's that gene of Isis that they're looking for, which is the spark of the divine that I referenced earlier.
I'm Rh negative, but I don't support the Nephilim, so.
and you don't have to worry about being saved if you've got Rh negative blood. That's got nothing to do with it. So
yay. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and I still have a lot of questions left too, but I want to get to some of the questions in the chat since I've been asking only my own questions so far. And there's some good ones over here. So people are asking, and I think we addressed this in the last episode, but they're asking whether or not the Antichrist could be a type of technology rather than a person. And I think you answered this really well in the last time we talked, where you said there's many Antichrists, and the Antichrist is more of an orientation than like a single person, and that there will also be a being that fulfills certain scriptural prophetic roles.
Yeah.
But that, right?
Yeah, so let's first understand there's going to be several Antichrists, whether it's the Mahdi that the Shia will present, or Lord Maitreya, as the name is called, or the Grand Monarch, and there's a lot of, and so, you know, there may even be one named Gog or a God, that is an Antichrist figure that sets up the counterfeit Armageddon in the Gog War. So expect many Antichrists, but when we talk about who the beast is, that's typically where the overlap comes. Is the beast human? Is it an organization? What is it? Well, it's that are all interconnected, but we need to understand them. So when the term beast is being used in the New Testament, first of all, Antichrist is referred to as he in English for the beast that comes up out of the pit, who once was, now is not, but will be again, and other applications. And similarly, he's called he in the Old Testament, even though those words are the pronoun. But it is a person, because he's going to receive a mortal head wound.
Yeah.
Right. So it has to be a person. And some people say, could it be a she? Possibly, but the applications in Hebrew words, as you take that also back in the Greek words, suggest a male. But whatever it is, it's a human or a human cross hybrid. And so, but beast also is used for the system. So it's going to be the system that comes with it. And beast is also used to describe a nation empire of the end time. So we need to understand that it's used because they're all interconnected and related. You're going to have that beast empire come first, so that they can give power to the Antichrist to become Antichrist and to become the son of perdition and the beast. And then that's when he implements the beast system that's already been created for him. That includes the mark.
Excellent answer. And so that the embodiment of the Antichrist, is there any indication of how that being is going to be born? Is it going to be like genetic engineering, or is there anything like that we know?
There's a lot of theories on that, right? So there's a lot of people who think that it's going to be the DNA of a Gilgamesh or something like that they're going to be able to somehow clone and bring back to life, or from the Shroud of Turin. There's a strong following on that. There's another possibility that people think, well, it would be Satan that will create through his seed as being, you know, the father, as in the occult pantheon of Osiris and Isis, who, you know, produce Horus as an Antichrist figure. That's how Antichrist will come about. But Satan does go to the abyss at the end of the end time, so that would suggest, okay, there's a possibility there. But I think he's either going to be recreated by a fallen angel for this generation, whether it's Satan or another angel. But I kind of think that at least what the bloodlines, the royal families, are positioning themselves to do is they want to present their own Um, it's just that they're going to be fighting it out between each other as to who's going to be the one that ultimately becomes the dynasty that in their world will rule the next 1,000 years and into eternity. That's why they're as cohesive at times, because even though directionally they're going in the same direction, they're all hungry for power. So I go back to that Highlander allegory of the fairy belief system, and there can only be one. And that's why they're chopping their heads off and they're sucking in all the others' energy instead of drinking the blood.
Yeah.
It's the quickening. So yeah, same.
Yeah, it must be awful to be them, honestly. I'm very glad I'm not a part of that, but it sounds horrible.
Yeah, they do think they're superior. There's no doubt about that. So
and they have so much hubris. Someone asked, what does it mean that Jesus will destroy him with his mouth? And by him, I think they mean the Antichrist.
Yeah, that's language, and this double-edged sword comes out of the word's mouth. The word who became flesh and became Jesus' mouth, and destroys all of them. I think that's an allegory. And here's how I get there. I mean, he could do it with some sort of high-powered technical weapon. I mean, the ability to do anything that they want. But if you understand that the Word created all things through God, at God's command, and that the weapon comes out of the Word's mouth, where words would come out, I think God commands it, and the Word makes it happen. Right? And that's what happens. And it's like a double-edged sword, which would be language of the time that people would understand very, very well, as opposed to instant obliteration or nuclear weapons or x-rays. I mean, however it happens, it just happens. They don't have to do anything other than God says the word, and that's the word, and it just happens. So I think that's how it happens all at once. There's just no power to stop it.
Yeah, I like that.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Yes, I totally.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I could be wrong,
right?
But that's how I would understand it. But yeah, I certainly understand it could also be the literal application too. So
I like this question because there's that quote, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," and the question is, do they know what they do? Because I'm like, I think they know what they do. But I don't think that necessarily that
there's a lot of.
Go ahead.
It's not necessarily for the fallen angels.
Right. That's why I'm like, I think that was meant more for people who were like sucked into the deception.
Yeah, it's for the people who are the pawns that don't know. They may think they know, but they don't know. But certainly the angels know, but the angels don't know everything, right? Because 1 Corinthians says that if they had anticipated the resurrection, would have ensured Jesus wasn't crucified.
True. Don't kill him. That's
which
exactly
maybe another meaning they don't know what doing.
Yes. Yeah. I love that because a lot of their plans, it's like they've been in control of things for so many thousands of years, but a lot of times their plans seem to go awry, and we seem to get sort of a boost or a benefit out of something they did not intend, or it seems like they didn't intend. So I love that when that happens.
Yeah, and they can't win until the restrainer is removed, and then it's not winning. It's a short period of 3.5 years, and it's over.
Yeah. So you say that we're in this terminal, back to my questions now. You say that we're in this terminal generation, and that means that we're in that end times, or we're in the generation that will see the end times, or however you want to phrase that. But does that mean that, and is Jesus coming back as a human, a man, sort of in the flesh, or is he coming back as more of like the spiritual embodiment alone and not in the flesh? And if he is coming back in the flesh, does that mean he's born already?
Who's born already?
Jesus.
I was following you. Well, okay. Not quite sure where you're going with that, but if I understand correctly, he's going to come back, and he's going to come back in body form, even though the word was originally spirit, right?
Okay.
And then it was made flesh, but Jesus' body died. But Jesus also showed his body to the disciples. And even for Thomas, who was doubting, he actually had to touch the wounds.
Yeah.
So he could easily appear in spirit, which he, is or was in heaven at least, right,
Yeah.
before he became flesh. But in the physical world, you tend to need a dwelling place for the spirit. Okay, and there's three parts to the physical nature on earth. You have the body, the soul, and the spirit. And the spirit comes from heaven. And the word oiketerion in Greek means a dwelling place for the spirit. We see that in only two applications in the New Testament. The first one is in Jude 1:6, where they leave their habitation. The word oiketerion, they're talking about the spirit angels. They left the dwelling place for the spirit in heaven, and they created these sins. The only way you can physically interact with the world and thus to procreate is take a physical form. You can appear in a spirit form, but to interact, you need a physical form. And to produce, you need to have a physical form because, unless they have some sort of power and so the second place you have where oiketerion shows up is in 1 Corinthians 5. And it comes up when it's talking about the clothes of heaven and putting on the clothes, having the clothes of earth and putting on the clothes of heaven in the future time, and this house in heaven. So we got a couple of allegories going along in there. And the word that goes back to oiketerion is house in heaven, dwelling place for. Okay, so what they're saying is that to house spirit, you need a body and a soul, and only I won't go down that other rabbit hole. You need this body to house the spirit.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, not only from that perspective, but in understanding demons.
Yeah.
Right. So demons are the bodiless spirit of the Nephilim, and probably the Rephaim. And they weren't permitted to go to sleep, according to the book of Enoch, or to go to heaven. And I also have a document for the biblical case for this on demons, if people want it. And I also have a document on body, spirit, and soul that walks through the oiketerion aspect as well. And also the changeling aspect, which again, I would cover off the oiketerion as well. But demons, after their bodies died, they can't interact in the world. So you've got demons that are in the abyss, that are in the sides of the pit that Ezekiel 31 and 32 talk about, who are talking to the Pharaoh. And you have the demons that are roaming the earth. And we know they do that because Jesus encountered them. In fact, Legion was the most famous one. And he said they're in dry places. So it's thirsting to interact in the world. And the only way they can physically interact in the world that they're desperate to do is to take over a body, to have a dwelling place, spirit, a habitat, a habitation, a oiketerion, and they have to suppress the human spirit, but it's a symbiotic relationship when they do that because the host is trying to fight back.
Yeah.
And that's why you have all these horrible things going on, but it's the only way that they can interact. And it's also why they might enter into animals, just as they entered into the pigs in the New Testament, the Legion I'm talking about here. So they know they can do that because that's another dwelling place, right? It's got a physical body and a soul, and it can suppress the soul and the spirit of the human, or the soul of the animal. And it's we also know that Satan can also enter in as spirit into a body, in more of a symbiotic relationship, as he entered into Judas to help him get over the hump to betray Jesus. That's the avatar word that the occults use for gods like Vishnu and Shiva, which is the destroyer god, that would be an avatara for their avatar. done that many times, which may happen with Azazel and or Satan with Antichrist, because that'll be a symbiotic relationship as to a possession and done by an angel as opposed to done by a demon, which is why I think cloning is such an important technology, or some sort of technology for the demons to participate in the end time, because they need a dwelling spirit to interact in this world.
Yeah. I agree with the clones, or I also sometimes wonder if they're going to try to use like a I'm blanking on the word, but like a robot, like a I can't think of the right word, but android or something, you know?
Yep. Something like that.
If it's
and it seems like they can, enter into technology as we get these reports coming out in terms of the AI research and stuff like that. So I think they're building technology for the Nephilim and the Rephaim for the end time. Probably clone, but
I think the exact same thing. That's part of why I've always hated them. I'm like, why are you guys building robots? You're literally creating the end of the world. Stop it. But that's what they're doing. Somebody asked, is there any way these demons can enter this vessel, like our bodies or whatnot, without our awareness of it, or, unconsciously to us?
Typically, so typically in the occult belief system, you have to invite them in. And unknowingly, I think some people might invite them in. And you get that sort of allegory that sort of comes up in some of their literature, and just make a quick reference. So in the vampire literature, and particularly with Dracula, they can't enter into the room at night unless you let them in to your place, unless you let them in. I think that's the allegory, and understand, vampires are a Nephilim allegory who drink blood for
yet another one.
For immortality, right? Yet another one. So if you understand that, but yet people will say, but I know Christians that were possessed, and I don't know how they would get by that, but they may not understand that they were inviting in something evil.
Right.
Understand that they will try and deceive to gain thing. You don't want anything entering into you.
No.
Except for the Holy Spirit. But I think they may disguise themselves as the Holy Spirit or a holy angel, and people let their guard down. I think they have to do something to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you too. And it seems like that is somewhat consistent in stories about possession and demonic interference and whatnot. And I'm glad you pointed out about the technology too, because I think, we're talking about demons maybe going into like an android or a sufficiently advanced robot or something, but I think they can easily kind of mess with our devices too. And it's just something to think about and be aware of as things move forward, perhaps.
Well, what I find very interesting is that you hear this, especially with the AI development, you get this Metatron name. I don't know. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. I don't know whether you know where that might come from or not, but there's several books of Enoch. The first one is the only one that runs like 99% with scripture, and we don't have the original Hebrew manuscript, but there's only a few crumbs in there. But you've got Enoch, and you've got Third Enoch, you've got Book of Giants, and in Enoch you have Enoch, who is raised to Messiah-like status and angelic status by his knowledge, and his name changed from Enoch to Metatron.
Okay, I remember this. But
I think that's a coincidence. Now, it may not be Enoch. It could be a demon or fallen angels saying they're Metatron, sort of feeding that mythos that is in the occult. Because again, they're deceiving them as well.
Right. And that Enoch book is not in alignment with scripture, and that therefore Metatron is not.
Yeah. There's so many things that are wrong with Second Enoch and Third Enoch. Have similar stories to first Enoch, but they get into like second Enoch has the gods Zeus and several other Greek gods in there. I mean,
Yeah.
as soon as you see names of polytheist gods in there, something's wrong. And to raise Enoch to be like,
yeah, and isn't Metatron
that should bring up some flags. So
that should tell you something, yeah. And isn't Metatron supposed to be
if you want,
go ahead.
If you want, we could do a show just on the different books of Enoch.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I've done shows on that just so that people know why I like. My opinion is I like First Enoch a lot, even though I know there's some corruption in there, and why I don't like these other two. I just go through it and yeah. And
well, I was lucky because I went looking for the Book of Enoch, and I just so happened to find the one that I think you're talking about that is the least corrupted. The whole scripture that I read was full of academics explaining why, like, this part is really close to scripture and this part is a little bit different, but here's why. It's like, I was like, okay, I think I got the right one, so to speak, which is nice. So it's an accident. Someone's asking, is it fair to say that the knowledge of angels is suppressed by the mainstream?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's about the dumbing down. You understand that it's the adepts that are suppressing the information. And you understand that you have the ones who control, and then you have the lemmings or the automatons that are doing their bidding. They're totally brainwashed. They're going nowhere. They don't want them to know the story. So if below and into the education level, things like evolution, they'll throw that away once we get into the last 7 years. But it's there to have the people who aren't going to be accepted into the bloodlines in the future, into who's are going to be. It serves their purpose to have them believe that lie, so that they can do what? Lead people away from God, to degrade God, and not give them credit for anything.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because I, like many people, I was raised in this culture. I was raised by this educational system. And so I, was taught evolution. I'm like, well, that's just what it is, And then it took me until I was 30, maybe. And I was tutoring a girl at a Christian private school, and she was doing a science class, and they were doing evolution. And so I had to, read her text and to understand her specific assignments. And as I was reading it, it actually taught me that evolution has never been proven. Macroevolution has never been proven.
It's a theory.
And
it's a theory.
Yeah. And they teach
Not
it
to you
like it's a fact. And microevolution, maybe you could say, is fact, right? But microevolution is a very different thing than macroevolution. Like saying that species come out of other species is a totally different ballgame. So I felt really betrayed. And I was like, well, what else have I been lied to about, And it leads you down a whole rabbit hole.
It does. And one of the things that, really helped me out was the idea of math. And for math, the math doesn't lie. You do the calculation. So if you apply math to the evolution theory, it's impossible.
It's literally impossible.
It's literally impossible. I mean, mathematical zero in science is somewhere between 1 and 3.5 trillion, 4 trillion, and based on the odds. You get the mathematical zero so fast at every step of the way, it's mathematically impossible. And they say, well, there's all these different other places around and they said, still doesn't add up. And here's the real problem. They go on what? I said, how is the universe according to science? 14 to 16 billion. I said, fine, give it 500 billion, give it 1,000 billion. Still doesn't add up.
Still doesn't.
When you're using those types of mathematical zero coming up at every step of the way over hundreds and thousands and I don't know how many steps there would be, it's not mathematically possible. There's not enough time. Even if it was mathematically at some ridiculous number nobody can calculate, there's not time.
Yeah. And it's like, I think you said it in your book that like not even Darwin, like Darwin's always cited as this, that
Yeah.
supporting this, and Darwin didn't even believe that actually. And
No,
if
no,
anything,
he
he
looked
was
at
also
it as
mistaken.
a way. He looked at it as a way of proving reincarnation, and it was an evolution of the spirit of
Uh-huh.
death and recycle and stuff like that. Because he was an Eastern mystic. He wasn't non-religious.
Makes sense. So I have so many more questions we're not going to get to tonight because we're going to run out of time. But I want to put one more question to you, because you talk about in the book about how perhaps, before Adam and Eve were created, I think there was perhaps that these angelic sort of beings, which are described as serpentine and serpent-like, were around in physical form, and that they were serpent-like, and that maybe this is sort of where the idea of dinosaurs came from. And I wonder what you think, because as far as I can tell, dinosaurs maybe didn't even exist at all, which I also was taught was like a Christian lie. But then I went looking, and every single dinosaur museum I can find doesn't have any bones in it at all. It's all just recreations of what they think might have happened. And then,
they get a few bones.
Yeah, like a tiny little fragments of it. And I'm like, well, that could be anything. Like, what is this? So what do you think about dinosaurs?
Well, I think they probably existed and were known as, dragons before the word dinosaur comes along, which again goes back to this serpentine imagery, right? And so if we look at a seraphim angel, and they're thought to be the watchers, and watcher shows up in Daniel 4 3 times, so it is in the book, and it's dealing with government. And I mentioned earlier, seraphim angels are they deal with religion as ministers, and also with government and the authority of government. And even though you have the fallen angels running this, they have the authority from God for a limited amount of time. Okay, seraphim angels, as you take that back to Hebrew, I am is the plural, seraph is the Hebrew word. They are fiery, serpent-faced angels with 6 wings, which are serpentine dragons, or an angelic dragon.
Yeah.
So that's to explain why you have Naga gods, dragon creator gods in China, feathered serpent gods and plumed serpent gods all through North America, serpentine gods all around the Middle East, because they're the ones who ran religion and government. And they're the ones who initially created Nephilim in Genesis 6 as sons of God. And so their offspring would look just like them, right? And they took serpentines in this world, and they ran the government. That's why the Nephilim took over the government. That's why ancient kings and things are depicted as serpents as well. And so if you want to get a transitional look to a serpent Google Akhenaten or go to a King Tut museum and picture Akhenaten, and you're going to see this protruding serpentine chin, these very, very high cheekbones, these very round snake-like eyes, and this elongated skull that is usually under a cap, a giant crown or headdress of some sort, and that they wore these serpentine cobra headdresses, that looked like a cobra's hood around, and a cobra on the hood. And all of a sudden you see it, and this is 12 to 1400 BC, depending on whose chronology that you're using. 1400 in biblical chronology. Secular would be more like 1200 to 1250. And this is over 2,000 years after the original ones were created. This is also after the flood. And that as they start to bring in lower level bloodlines to keep blood disease out, you start to get this transition from size and facial features into humans. But they always try and keep their bloodlines as pure as possible, get hemophiliac disease or Habsburg jaw disease or any of the other blood diseases. So they're forced to bring in less pure bloodlines to keep disease out, like distant nobility relatives, they tend to like to do that. So yeah, and look at him from the side. He's got that serpentine
Yeah,
look.
I've never really looked at that, and it's pretty pronounced and disturbing.
It is. It is. And so that's why they were thought to look like serpents. But we also get other angels from different orders that probably reproduce well, not necessarily to be the ruling or the priest class, but to be warriors. So you get like the linemen of Moab. So picture all of these lion gods that are in all the different pantheons, whether or not it's Nergal, the Sumeria, or whether or not it's Mahi and several other ones in the Egyptian pantheon, or Bast, who the Black Panther superhero was based on,
Yeah.
right? And her name actually comes up in the movie as the as sort of the god that's being worshipped. I mean, no coincidence. You also
Yeah.
have the lion man of Moab. So we know that you have that, and have these depictions and this mythology of these lion warriors throughout the Middle East. You also have the Tengu gods, who are the bird and raven Nephilim, just as you have Anunnaki depicted as bird or raven type gods in the Sumerian pantheon. And the Anunnaki were also rulers and kings. Some people think they're the seraphim as well, but you get these pictures of the Tengu. That's Tengu. If you want to Google it, and there'll be some pictures that come up. I've also got a document on it with as many pictures as I could find. Same with the main ones. And then you have the dogmen mythos that I have a three-part series on, and that I think come from dog gods like us and gods like that, right? Because you have, and you also have secular writings and history of these, and these are all warrior class, not ruling class, but a warrior class Nephilim. So when you get these animal looks and references, understand the different kinds of Nephilim.
Yeah.
And it's consistent all around the world.
It is. And there's so many different types. It's crazy. When you had that recent post on Facebook with the dog, dogmen and dog sort of Nephilim, I was like, wow, this is, and it's the type of thing that if you, which is what I was saying on Facebook as a comment, which if you just plopped this down again now, because we're so far removed from it, we just look at it as fanciful fairy tale, like whatever. But if you plopped those down now into the world, like, I don't know what people would do, but especially if they have no faith and no beliefs and no, understanding of their soul, then I don't know. It'd be pretty terrifying, I'm sure. So, I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't be terrified. I'm just saying I think that they're in a worse position if they have no idea what's going on.
So I have some terrific pictures on all three kinds, and in that one post you had, that was, I think, part 2 that I think I saw you commenting on. There's a part 1, and then there's a part 2. And it's interesting, like when you get into, just as local reference, and I will take everything in all of this, back to the Bible as well to show you at least some sort of connection. So in the book of Judges, you've got 2 Midianite kings called Zeb and Oreb. And Oreb goes back to Hebrew for raven, and Zeb goes back to wolf.
So there you go. Wow.
Just as, and so I'll throw out, secular things of history, and then I'll connect, what the Bible might have to say on it. And it's just something to consider, that why would it be just one order of angels that reproduced? It would make sense that there are other orders that did as well.
It's a really good point. Yeah, and just like someone just said, Dakota said in the chat, there's a lot to this. There's a lot to this, like this much to this and more. This is not all of Gary's research. This is just a very large portion of it in the Genesis 6 conspiracy. So definitely, if you're out there listening to this and you want to know more, get this, because, I think, Gary, you plan to come back on Rogue Ways, and I plan to have you back as often as possible. So we'll cover more, but you can have it all as soon as you want, if you want to go buy the book. So do you want to tell people where to go find that and how to connect with you? And like you said, you're offering all of these materials to people if they want them. So how can they get them?
Yep. First thing is, if you want to get some information or ask me a question or ask me my thoughts on something, you can go to my website, which is the Genesis 6 conspiracy.com, Genesis 6 with this conspiracy.com. I also have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on the website, so you can get a good feel for what's in the book. And on there, there's a connection to contact the author, and that's my website email that you click on and you send on there, or you can write it down as the Genesis 6 conspiracy, like the website, at gmail.com. You can get a hold of me that way as well. If you're asking for a document, don't ask me for all my documents. I get people, I have a lot, and I don't know, it takes a lot of time to do all of them. So by topic, if you give me by topic, I'll send you what I have on that topic. And you always ask for other topics. So I have a lot of documents. Because I really want to get information out there. Or follow me and ask me a question on Facebook, on my timeline. It's an open timeline. Anybody can post. And or Messenger, or on Twitter at Gary Wayne 63, at Gary Wayne 63. I am still catching up, probably 2 weeks behind on answering emails right now, or maybe a week and a half. And I'm slowly catching that up after not like over a month of not being able to respond. But I will get back to you. I have them, and I go back and I start and keep answering them. And some of them take some time, because sometimes I get 12 questions at a time, and they're usually not simple answers. So it takes a while to do it, but I will get back to you. And I love to get the documents out, and I get a lot of good feedback on the documents. And on each of those documents, anyone that I've published on Facebook or elsewhere, there'll be a link to it embedded in the document that will bring up the pictures, which are really interesting and correspond to the commentary.
It's so fascinating. This is why I'm like, we could do endless shows, and you have endless information, endless research, and we're so lucky to have you and to have you sharing here. So thank you very much. But I want to ask you too, before we shut down, is you mentioned another book, or the next book, in Genesis 6 conspiracy. Is that already a thing, or is it coming, or
no?
Did I miss it? Okay.
No. Well, I started. I got about 200 and some odd pages into next book, and I don't want it to be as long as the Gen 6. I want more people to
take it on,
to want to read it, right? And that's why I'm trying to do shorter topics, even though this was supposed to be a short book. It got sidetracked. But and then I just kind of thought, it's just not sort of going the way I want it to be, and I said, I shouldn't write it the same way I did Gen 6. I need to tailor it better to the audience. And so I had to go back and start to rewrite, and I'm trying to continue to work that into my free time and continue to do. The publisher is really anxious to get another book, not a sequel to Gen 6. It'll have kind of a beginning in it, not really a Gen 6, although I might get a few more things, but I want to stick more true to what the subject matter is, which is more prophecy, and it's about lost Israel, and who they might be for the end time, how it relates to the Holy Covenant, and an awakening in the end time, and to be led in Exodus by Jesus when he comes back. So, and then the next book, I think, even though I've got lots of other prophecy ones, I've promised the publisher to do a sequel to the Gen 6. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited for both of those. That's
but I'm a ways away from saying it's going to be, next year for sure. But I feel a lot better at where I'm at in terms of being comfortable with it. And I just needed to say, get it back to here's what I'm really trying to do with it. So let's try and be like a Gen 6. Let's make there's similar sort of streams that might interweave in it. let's keep it true to what that message is I want to get through in that book.
Yay. That's so good. I'm so excited for it. I'm sure everyone else is as well. And like I said, and like you said, there's so many places where people can come connect with you and find more information. Even if they don't want to take on this book, is worth it. I love it. And I think if people have been watching this show for a while, they know that I'm generally a bit well read, and I have like my fingers in a lot of different pots, and I like to look at all these things. And that, like I said, there's so much in here that I've never have thought of before. So it's really, for me, a fascinating read, and I love it. And I suggest it to everybody. But people can go find these shorter sort of nuggets that you give, like on your Facebook page and other places. And like you said, they can email you and ask you for documents on any given topic. And you're just so good at researching and connecting back to the sources that it's such a immense gift to us. So thank you for all of that.
Terrific. And hopefully I'll have part 3 of my Mount Herman series out in the next few days. So
awesome. Cool.
Kind of reworking that one. I think it'll be a 4-part series before I'm done.
That's exciting. Well, is there anything you want to leave people with as a final thought before we end?
No, I think we've covered things off well, and yeah, I thought questions were excellent, and hopefully people in the chat room were happy with the information I was providing tonight, and maybe answered a few questions that they didn't know the answers to, or at least maybe added some more information on it.
Yes. Well, I have 20 more. I only got halfway through my questions, so we'll definitely have to do it again. But fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the Genesis 6 conspiracy author, Gary Wayne. Gary, thank you again so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. So the end is not to be feared. The end has always been wrapped up in the beginning all along. And truly, when we're honest enough to admit it, we can see that every end really is a new beginning. And the only thing you have to fear is the state of your own soul, and then only if you've kept it from the creative force that it sprung forth from. Your soul never was in jeopardy if you kept it from the clutches of evil. And if you're listening to this, I'm pretty positive that you've done just fine. If not, go searching to reconnect. I've got your back, and I'm always here for you, just as every soul still connected to compassion is. You're never alone. And until you remember the love that lives forever inside of the divine spark that exists inside of you, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.